All right. Oh, actually, not yet. There's another chair here, Aaron, if you'd like to grab that. No, yet.
No way.
I don't. That's probably not the best seat.
Thank you. I work Thursday morning. I don't ever work with you Thursday.
All right. You, Tim. You.
Unless I'm forgetting.
Don't give me a hard time.
Guess I'll see you tomorrow.
Hey.
Yes, bro.
Good morning, everyone. So, my apologies that they moved us to a room that always causes some chaos. So here we are, though. Now we can start. And it's always like to give a little bit of review. So remember we talked about this guy, Yuan Shikai. Right? Remember, Yuan Shikai is able to become president of the Republic of China, even though he doesn't believe in republics. Right? This guy does not believe in democracy. He doesn't think it's a good idea. He essentially is a dictator. But he had an army. And so he's able to negotiate between the Qing and the revolutionary forces led by Sun Yat-sen. And they're able to make a compromise where he becomes the next president. And the idea, remember, they're going to write a new constitution that will govern China. But remember, he doesn't like democracy. And so you'll recall there was this nationalist, Sung Jiao-ren, who was this really good, what can I say? He was good at winning votes. He was a good politician. He was getting support for the nationalists. And so Yuan Shikai had him assassinated. Right, so this guy is really, really anti-democracy. Right? Yuan Shikai is very much against democracy. In fact, he tries to make himself emperor. Right? He declares Confucianism state religion. He declares himself emperor. And at this point, basically becomes a big joke. No one takes this guy seriously. Remember, there was all these radical reformers who wanted something more like democracy. They don't want to go back to the old imperial system. And then people who did believe in the old imperial system said, well, let's just bring back the Manchu emperors. And there is a brief moment where a Mongol general takes Puyi, takes over Beijing, and reinstalls him as the emperor for several days before they're driven back out. So unfortunately for China, the situation is very bad. Right? The 1911 revolution succeeded in overthrowing the Qing, but it doesn't really establish a very strong government afterwards. Right? This thing falls apart. So Sun Yat-sen is really frustrated by all this. Right? He worked so long to achieve his goal, his dream of overthrowing the Manchus and establishing a Chinese republic. He was finally successful, and then things just almost immediately fall apart. Right? This is over a period of like 5 or 6 years that everything goes bad. So he's in a very difficult political situation. He's very weak. And one thing we have to remember, China is now divided among these warlords. Remember, there were all these regional armies. Remember, what gave Yuan Shikai power was his regional army, the Beiyang Army, which literally means North Direction Army. You can see the geographical and the regional emphasis here. Right? He's in charge of the North Army. So China's divided into warlords, each of which kind of governs their own territory, and their power literally comes from the fact they have soldiers. Sun does not have his own army, so he relies on these warlords for help at times. One thing I didn't mention on Friday, but they mentioned in the video, remember, at times Sun Yat-sen relies on gangsters, right, like criminal underworld guys, the Chinese mafia, basically, for help. He also relied on this guy, Chiang Kai-shek, who was kind of his enforcer. Remember, they told the story of Chiang killing a man on his hospital bed. So Sun Yat-sen is frustrated. He realizes that he has to change his thinking. And what he becomes convinced is that Chinese people are not yet ready for democracy. He thinks that democracy is a good thing. He wants to build a republic. But he says China's not ready for it. So what he wants to do is have one-party rule. He wants the nationalists to take over and govern China and help China get ready so eventually they can have a true republic and full democracy. But notice that's very similar to what we'll see with the communists. The communists will also argue that in order to save China, you need a one-party government. They just disagree about the party. The communists think the Communist Party should be the one that does this. The nationalists think it should be the Nationalist Party. So, like I said, China has a lot of serious problems. There's no effective central government. There's no clear ideology uniting the people. It's not clear where they should go. So we're basically like how we were in the late 19th century. Nothing's really improved. It's gotten worse in many ways. Right? People are becoming more loyal to their local regions. And remember, China has spent decades, even hundreds of years, divided. It's possible for China to exist as multiple different countries. Right? Remember we talked about macro regions on that first day of class. So it's possible that this could stay divided, right? And especially there's all this emphasis on the military, right? What gives you power in this time period is whether you have soldiers or not. This is why, like we said in this most recent National Day celebration, one reason why Tianyu said, he was proud, because Tianyu knows this history of China being weak militarily and so being stomped on. But this is, I would argue, something of a civil war, because now we have different Chinese groups fighting each other, but it's not like the American Civil War where we have two sides. We have several dozen sides fighting each other to see who will control China. Now, that was kind of reviewed. To go in with some new material, one thing I'd emphasize is this tension, and that has to do with ethnicity. So there was a nationalist, a revolutionary commander named Li Yuanhong. You don't have to remember his name, but we're back to the 1911 revolution. When he took over a city, he offered a sacrifice in which he sang this song was sung. Raise the Han, raise the Han, raise our great Han. The Han people love the mountains and rivers. How can they let thieves occupy them? Compatriots work hard, battle diligently forward, kill all the barbarians, raise the great Han. And then the song goes on, destroy the Manchu, destroy the Manchu, destroy the thieving Manchu, if it's not clear enough. The spirit of the Yellow Emperor, the ancient ancestor of the Chinese people, help us kill the thieves. You can see here Zhou Rong's ideas. Remember Zhou Rong, the guy who authored the Revolutionary Army, also had similar anti-Manchu ideas. Right? Kick the Manchus out, any who want to stay need to die. We should probably kill the Manchu emperor so that they can't ever restore their rule over China. So this is a problem. The Han Chinese want to end Manchu domination, get rid of the old dynasty. They're nationalists. But they want to keep all of the Qing's territory. Remember earlier, and I said this is something that's kind of tricky when we talk about Chinese history. Oftentimes I use Qing and China interchangeably. That's not technically correct. Remember, China was part of the Qing Empire. It was not the Qing Empire. It was a part of the Qing Empire. And the example I like to give is this. Tibet, which the Republic of China will claim as its territory, Qing officials were stationed in Tibet. There were Qing officials in Tibet during the Qing dynasty. That's what we call it, a protectorate. But those Qing officials were always Manchus, never Han. So that's an example. The Qing was a part of China. So when the Qing controlled Tibet, they did. I mean, this would be considered part of the Qing Empire. Mongolia was considered part of the Qing Empire. But it was ruled by Manchus, not by Han Chinese. So this creates kind of a tension. The principle of nationalism, which the Han are following, we Han don't want to be ruled by Manchu, that justifies them taking over traditional China. Right? Let's kick out the Manchus who are ruling us. They're foreigners. They shouldn't be ruling us. That's a hallmark of nationalism. But then if you justify kicking out the Manchus because they're foreigners, how do you justify taking over Manchuria? How do you justify including Tibet and Xinjiang? Areas that are not traditionally Chinese culturally. In Xinjiang, the major language is Turkish and Arabic for reading the Quran. In Tibet was Tibetan. These people have different religion, different culture, different customs. They were not traditionally considered Chinese. Right? So the Han are in this, Chinese are in this difficult situation because they want to overthrow the Manchus, not be ruled by foreigners, but they want to claim all Qing territory. Strategically, you can understand why they would want to do this. Practically speaking, you can understand why they would want to do this. But it does create an intellectual tension. So I think that's one reason why, notice most of the time we have talked about, when I mention a Chinese figure, Tianyu knows instantly who I'm talking about, once I get the pronunciation right. But he didn't know Zhou Rong, who's considered important in Chinese history, or from a Western perspective. And I think the reason that you're not going to talk about him so much in China is to not disrespect minorities in China. Right? Zhou Rong would not be politically correct in China. It would be kind of disrespectful to Chinese ethnic minorities. One way they try to deal with this is the idea of the five-nation republic. They had this flag. Have you seen this flag before? I'm curious, can you? Are you familiar with this flag?
No.
This was an early flag of China. Incidentally, the Japanese will use this in Manchuria. If you took my Japanese history class, you may remember this flag. But they had the idea of what they called the five-nation republic, and with it they had a five-nation flag. Each color represents a different nation. The five nations were the Han, the Manchu, the Mongol, the Tibetan, and the Hui. The Hui are an ethnic group that were traditionally Muslims. They each have their own color. Han is red, Manchu is yellow, Mongol is blue, Tibetan is white, Muslim Hui is black. And notice that corresponds very neatly to these regions outside of traditional China. Xinjiang, this would be where the Hui are, the black. Tibet is where the white are. China, of course, is the red. The Manchu are the yellow up there in Manchuria. And Mongolia, forgot their colors, the blue up there in Mongolia. So it neatly unifies everyone in this ideology, right? That's the basic idea. But if you're an ethnic minority, what might be your problem with the flag? Right, Amir, go ahead.
I guess you don't fit any.
Well, if you're one of these five, I should say.
Yeah.
There's 56 today in China, by the way. What's the problem?
The position that you all apply?
Yeah, who gets to be on top? Right, the Han Chinese get to be on top. And I apologize, I don't know the Chinese for this, but you often run into the term Han chauvinism. Right, so periodically the Communist Party will say we should oppose Han chauvinism, meaning we Han have to not insist on being the only Chinese. Tibetans are Chinese. Mongolians are Chinese. Tibetans are Chinese. Han Chinese are only one type of Chinese. That's kind of the official perspective. But you can see how if you're an ethnic minority, this would make you uncomfortable. Right? We're all Chinese, but the Han are the most Chinese. And you can think about it this way. If you're Tibetan, you say, I'm not a minority. I'm the majority. This is Tibet. Though not anymore, now that's Han majority. But this time period, it was Tibetan majority. So you can see that there would be possibly some conflict. And to give you a sense of this, here is something from a Mongolian leader. I apologize. Jetsundamba Kukutu. That's what I'm going to go with. He was, you know how like in Tibet, how the Dalai Lama is considered an incarnation of a Buddha? He's the believed to be the incarnation of, I'm going to butcher this, but Avalokitesvara, the Buddha of mercy, of compassion. Guanyin. Yeah, he's considered, Guanyin is the Chinese pronunciation of that. What is it? Guanun, I think, in Korean. And Kannon in Japanese, right? So Dalai Lama is the incarnation there. The Mongols also followed Tibetan Buddhism, which is weird. I don't know why we call it Tibetan Buddhism if the Mongols are following it. It should be Mongol Buddhism. But in any case, kind of gets complex. But he was considered incarnation of another Buddha. And so this is an important Mongol leader. And he says, originally, and this is 1911 during the revolution, Mongolia was not part of China because it followed the Qing royal house from the first day. It owes that house a great debt. Mongolia has absolutely no connection at all with China. Consequently, today, when the Qing court has been destroyed, Mongolia has no natural connection with China and should be independent. So you have this idea that there are people who say, we don't want to be a part of China because we're not a part of China. We're part of the Qing are gone, therefore we should be independent. You may ask yourself, why is it that Mongolia becomes independent and these other places don't? It's because of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union is going to pressure China into allowing Mongolia to be independent. That's going to happen later, though. So I do want to make some comments on the reading, and I do apologize. My watch has stopped working. Okay, I have to check my phone periodically. I'm checking it to get the time, so I can time myself. So just so you know, I'm not checking messages. So you read these. This was the reading assignment. One was the Essentials of the New Life Movement. Remember that was by Chiang Kai-shek. And you can see that the nationalists, who we'll be talking about as time goes on, were focusing on this idea of a kind of Confucian modernity. The nationalists have this basic approach that there are a lot of good things in Chinese tradition and culture that we need to preserve. And that's what you saw there. Right? That's what you saw there. The communists later will oppose that. The early communists say Confucianism is futile, it's really bad, we need to get rid of it. And that's one difference between them. Though curiously now Confucianism is held up as a good thing in China. And it's interesting that the major way that China tries to export soft power is through the Confucius Institutes, which are institutes that are like embedded in an American or any other university outside of China, used to teach Chinese culture and language. What's interesting that they named them not Mao Zedong Institutes, they named them Confucius Institutes. And their symbol is a dove. Right? So they try to present a certain image of China. You also read this thing, China's Modern Sketch, the golden era of cartoon art. I just thought it was cool. We talk about all these depressing things. I know, poor Tianyu, sometimes you look so sad during class, because we talk about so many depressing things in this class, right? So I assigned this guy, I just thought it was creative and funny, right? Chinese people are very funny, right? Don't forget that. We're going to talk about all these depressing things. but there's a lot of humor in China. And also I thought it showed a kind of liberal democratic China, right? China's modern sketch, that's the kind of thing that liberal democracies produce. It also shows the limits of Chiang Kai-shek's power, because remember, they had a comic making fun of him, right? Showed him with the big fist and the little head. This was not a secret comic. You could just go buy it. But he couldn't do anything about it, nor does it seem like he cared that much. How to be a good communist, I just wanted you to read something by Liu Shaoqi. He's going to be very important as we go on, but also just showed why people might be attracted to communism, because I mean, who would not like that? Like, in How to Be a Good Communist, it kind of promises that communism will fix everything. Right? It's going to be a very attractive ideology. So a few announcements before we continue. So review quiz 7 will be due by 11:59 p.m. Tuesday of next week. Why? Monday and Tuesday is fall break. So I don't want to make it due Sunday, because that's confusing as all get out, because you won't be coming to class on Monday. So it's due Tuesday of next week. Right? So we have no review quiz due on Sunday, it's due on Tuesday. Our fall break is on Monday and Tuesday of that week, so this class will not meet on Monday. This Wednesday, employers and graduate programs are available from 10 to 1 in Greer Student Center. So if you're interested in seeing some opportunities, you're getting ready to graduate, please go have a look there. Wednesday, October 16th is the last day to drop an individual course with a W, so keep that in mind. Talk to me if you're thinking of dropping this course. Today, my office hours are 1:15 to 2:15 and 8 to 10 tomorrow, because I had to have some meetings I had to rearrange. So any questions about upcoming announcements? Okay, one other thing I need to talk about is the reading quiz 7. That's not due for a while. It's not due this Sunday. It's not due till next Sunday. So you may say, why are you going to talk about it now? There's a couple reasons. First of all, the readings are on something called family. I don't know if you have heard of this. I forgot. I'm sorry. It's Pao Jia? I apologize. It's my fault. But this is a very famous Chinese novel that was written in the early 1920s. I'm having you read an excerpt of the graphic novel version. Right, so it's not the whole thing, but it's another comic, but it's really good. And it's about kind of challenging traditional gender norms. Right, it's about challenging traditional gender norms. But even so, it still manages to stay conservative and patriarchal. So I think it's interesting to read, because it's like a wealthy guy, wealthy, powerful guy trying to be a feminist and failing, if that makes sense. So you may enjoy, hopefully you'll enjoy reading it. Then the other reading is a silent movie that we'll watch in class. So that's why I said reading. And it's from a documentary, or it's from a silent movie called The Goddess, which is a really, really good Chinese silent movie made in Shanghai. So we will watch that a week from Wednesday. Right? We will watch that in class a week from Wednesday. It won't take the whole class. If for some reason you have to miss, I will upload it, but I have to. It's not the whole film. I have to give you some things to join the film together, so you'll miss that if you don't come Wednesday. So do your best to come Wednesday. It will be very helpful if you've already read Family, and if you print it out and bring the reading guide with you. Right? Because the reading guide will have questions based on the movie. So it's helpful to bring that with you. And to have read Family, because I argue Family's pretty conservative. This one's more radical. Right? The Goddess is more radical. But like I said, the quiz isn't actually due until Sunday, October 20th. I just think this is maybe a good one to get started on early. And if you're interested, the History Club is hosting Tuesday at 3:30 p.m. and LC 374 is going to be showing the movie Rocky IV. Right, this is a great historical movie. It goes back to, especially Tian and Yuhui, if you want to understand American Cold War culture, this is it. Right, I mean, you can see what's he wearing. Right, he's got an American flag on. But this is when Rocky boxes a Russian. And I watched this movie in a theater when I was a kid, and there's this scene. You know how like they have training montages where they show the guys training, and they show how he and the Russian guy trained differently. And Rocky's very pure, so he's out in the snow, like he's literally jogging in a forest with snow. So it emphasizes, his pure American goodness. And then they juxtapose that with the Russian, and he's getting injected with steroids. It's great. You totally got to watch this if you want to understand Cold War American anti-communism. Right, very good. If you want to understand that, like I say, it's not a bad movie. Okay. So now we need to talk about something called the May 4th movement. Right, we need to talk about something called the May 4th movement, and in particular how it impacts Sun Yat-sen. Right, so we're looking at the story of Sun Yat-sen and the May 4th movement. So as you watch this clip, I want you to catch, what was the May 4th movement? How did it change Sun Yat-sen's views? Why did Sun begin to work with the Soviet Union? Oh my gosh. How does that work? What assistance did he receive from the Soviet Union, and what did he give in return? right? So those are the major questions. And by the way, that's a young Chiang Kai-shek, right? You probably recognize Sun Yat-sen. That's Chiang Kai-shek.
An elder statesman dreaming of the future, if not for the Treaty of Versailles. See, China's entry into World War I divided the country, especially since Japan had used the war as a pretext to invade German possessions in China and solidify its control over the Beijing government. So when the Treaty of Versailles let Japan keep Chinese territory it invaded, the betrayal was too much. China had joined the Allies despite having little interest in the war, and their reward for being on the winning side was to lose territory. Mass protests followed, with a younger generation of students emerging as leaders. New forces like the Communist Party of China sprung up, arguing for an alliance with their new revolutionary kin in Soviet Russia. And one of these young, motivated revolutionaries was an assistant university librarian named Mao Zedong. At first, Sun dismissed this new cultural movement as a passing fad. But it had quickly become clear that this youth movement had staying power, and that they had respect for Sun's new, outspoken style. In his writing years, Sun became more openly anti-colonial. Years of eliciting support from foreign powers had worn him down. He raged against hypocrisy of governments like the United States that praised democratic systems but supported the autocratic warlords. He upbraided Japan for emulating Western colonialism rather than siding with other Asian nations. And he called for a canceling of all unequal treaties that foreign governments had imposed via military force. And those positions proved extremely popular with the young New Culture revolutionaries. And that popularity boost came at a crucial time. A Sun-friendly warlord retook Guangzhou, allowing him to return in 1920 and form a second military government. But it lasted only 7 months before Sun set off on another ill-timed northern expedition. A rival seized Guangzhou in his absence and forced Sun to hop on a gunboat and evacuate to Shanghai. And unfortunately, he'd left behind some papers proposing an alliance between the countries who'd lost the most in the Treaty of Versailles, namely China, Germany, and Soviet Russia. This revelation, as well as Sun's difficulty in working with progressive warlords and constitutionalists in Beijing, tarnished his legitimacy. While still respected as an elder statesman, public opinion increasingly cast Sun as irrelevant. Abandoned by both domestic and foreign allies, Sun turned to the only ones offering aid, the Soviets. Russia's new government was, strangely enough, a fairly natural ally. Like China, it was a revolutionary state. The two shared a border. Communist doctrine considered anti-colonial movements brothers in arms. And finally, Soviet Russia was the only nation that committed to return Chinese territory and abolish unequal treaties. Plus, the Soviets were sending agents to help advise and undermine governments across the globe. And Sun wanted their advice, money, and weapons. He needed it for starters, but it was also clear that if he didn't accept it, someone else would. In the ensuing agreement, Russia recognized Sun as the leader of China, agreed to support his bid for national reunification, and formally renounced most Russian claims to China itself. Sun, for his part, made it clear that he would not be accepting the Soviet model, but that he would allow individual Chinese communists to join the Nationalist Party. Under the table, though, the agreement provided Sun with money, arms, and Soviet training to help him reorganize the nationalists and establish military academies.
Those military academies look just like churches, which is really weird. I don't know who's in charge of the art direction there. But okay, so how would you summarize what's this thing called the May 4th movement? What are they call, or what are they calling for? It's this idea that we need to transform China culturally. Remember the AQ book that shows how it really is critical of Chinese traditional culture? That is born out of the May 4th movement. It's this idea, and remember how it emphasized that, the 1911 revolution didn't really change anything. We changed the structure of our government, but the essence stayed the same. China didn't really change the same. All we did was cut off the queues. But the same people are still in charge, basically. And we haven't changed. So we need to change our culture. We need to go through deep changes. And we'll talk more about that shortly. But Sun Yat-sen then is going to become more anti-what? Anti-colonialism. Before, remember, he'd been trying to work a lot with the United States, with Japan, with Britain, with anyone who would help him. Because they're liberal democracies, and he thinks China should become a liberal democracy. but he will see these countries as hypocritical because they can't claim to believe in democracy, but not for other people. Right? When it comes to issues of colonialism, they're fine ruling other people without democratic approval. Right? So he looks increasingly at the United States, at France, at Great Britain, Japan as hypocrites. People who say they believe in democracy and want democracy for themselves, but will not share it with other people, and will use their power to bully smaller, or not smaller, but weaker countries like China. And so they're all a bunch of hypocrites, these guys are not helping us. And that's key to why he begins to work with the Soviet Union. Right?
Soviet Union was a revolutionary country, and so the border was
Yeah.
closed to them.
Yeah, it makes sense. They're countries that share borders, and they're also, and recently both gone through revolutions. They were challenging the status quo. They were challenging the countries that basically dominate the world. Right? United States, Great Britain, France, and to a certain extent Germany, though not after it loses the war. Right? These are countries that want, another country that wants revolutionary change, and that pledges itself to be anti-colonial, to be against these colonial governments. And in return, he receives three important things from them, from the Soviet Union.
Money, weapons, and advice.
Right, money, weapons, advice. Money is always useful. You need money to do anything. Weapons. Remember, Sun's problem was he did not have an army. Now he can start building one. And that advice was both political. One thing that I have to stress, the communists in Russia were really good political organizers. And the Nationalist Party is initially organized like a communist party. And also they get military advice. How to raise an army, how to train the army, and how to use that army. Especially, you have to note that the communists win a civil war in Russia, even though they were a minority. Like, the Russian communists were never the majority in Russia, but they still won the civil war. In return, the big thing is he has to allow Chinese communists to join his party. So it sounds kind of weird, because can you imagine if Republicans were allowed to join the Democratic Party and stay Republicans? Like, I think technically I'm not sure that's against the rules, but it'd be kind of weird, wouldn't it? But that's the deal, right? That's the deal, right? In return, communists are allowed to join the nationalists. So now to kind of step back for a second, I want to show you how all this impacted Sun Yat-sen. But to make this clear, Japan declared war on Germany in 1914, and then they seized German concessions in China. And remember Qingdao? Remember the place where they had the German beer and where the Boxer Rebellion, that's the region where the Boxer Rebellion started? It's also where Confucius is from. Now Japan controls it. China will declare war against Germany in 1917. The video clip made it sound like the foreign powers were really pressuring China. I don't think it was quite as clear as that. China was interested in getting on the war effort and possibly getting its territory back. China's main contribution was to send laborers. Chinese did not actually fight in the war, but they sent hundreds of thousands of people to go dig trenches in the West, in Western Europe, right, in France. So China will make a material contribution to the war. Sending several 100,000 laborers is kind of a big deal, right? Because then that means that those soldiers who would normally be doing that work can go fight. The Versailles Treaty formally ending the war in 1919 is a big disappointment to China. China wanted Qingdao and that whole area back. But especially remember, this is Confucius' birthplace. Even if you don't like Confucius, this is still a part of Chinese culture. But according to the treaty, Japan is allowed to keep them. It turned out that there had been a secret deal between Japan, France, and Britain that if Japan seized that area, they would be allowed to keep it after the Versailles Treaty. The Chinese, you can guess, felt very much betrayed by the liberal democracies. Right? So think about this. If you're a Chinese person, you're kind of like, I'm sick of Great Britain, France, the United States, and now Japan. They keep talking about democracy, but they don't follow through. And now look what they've done to us. Right? They gave us away our territory. Now, technically speaking, the U.S. wasn't in the war when the deal was made, so it's not our fault. But you can still get the sense of their frustration. Why do we want to be like these liberal democracies? These guys behave badly. Now, for a long time, there was no other option. There's no other system that can challenge liberal democracy. There's no alternative. So if you were to say, why would we want to be like these liberal democracies? They're bad. People would respond, what else will we be? There's no other alternative until communism. Then you've got an alternative that seems to be working. Right? That's one reason why Chinese will be interested in communism. Liberal democracies are not behaving from the perspective of the Chinese. They seem like hypocrites. They seem uninterested in keeping China weak, so they can continue to keep their treaties that give them lots of wealth and power in China. Right? So these countries talk about idealism, but when it comes down to it, they don't want China to get back, or they don't want to reverse the unequal treaties. By the way, the unequal treaties from the American and the British will not be gotten rid of until 1943, when China is our ally against Japan. Right? We'll keep those treaties. So the Chinese aren't happy about this, right? These people, they keep these treaties that treat us badly. One thing, just as a quick aside, this is really weird because all this stuff that leads to the March 1st movement, in a sense, all starts because Japan wants this territory. They give it back to China a couple years later. If they just would have done it at the beginning, history would have been very different, but they waited. So what happens then, when this is announced publicly, students are very upset. There's student protests at Beijing University, one of the most important universities in China. So students are upset, they're angry at the Versailles Treaty, and that the liberal democracies just are giving Chinese territory away to Japan, when China was an ally. Thank you for your help, we're giving your territory to someone else. So China refused to sign the treaty. There's these massive student protests. Like I said, they started at Beijing University, but they spread. Right? They spread. So this is interesting because what this does to students is it convinces them, first of all, China's really weak. No one's taking us seriously. This is really bad. But we can bring change. China did protest. China did refuse to sign the treaty. So things are bad, we're weak, people are beating up on us, but you know what? We can bring change. And their goal, and we call this the May 4th movement because it breaks out on May 4th, 1919, but it's often given the years 1915 to 1923. So this is complex. But the big thing of the May 4th movement, I want you to remember this movement, we associate beginning on May 4th with the protests, but this movement focuses on the idea of strengthening the nation state through radical reform of society. This is again where AQ comes in. How do we fix China? We fix the Chinese people. We fix the Chinese people. This is often in a sense called a cultural revolution. We have to change China's culture. We have to change our civilization. Change the culture first, and then politics will follow. Right? Change the culture first, then politics will follow. And this is an image of the protest. Right? This is an image of the protest. And it says, the great people's country, I'm sorry, what does this say?
It's called the whole country's person have a conference.
Okay, yeah, the all country conference, right? We're bringing together the whole country to change the culture, right? To protest against these Western democracies and how they're and Japan and how they're treating us, and we're going to fix that by changing the culture. And that brings us to one of my favorite people in all of Chinese history, Lu Xun, right? The guy who wrote AQ. Right, so you watched a little video about AQ earlier. I now want to play a clip for you about Lu Xun. Right? As you watch this clip, we should be able to answer 3 questions. What irony did Lu Xun face? He faces this really weird irony. Why did he turn away from his medical career? He started off to be a doctor and became an author. And what did he see his mission as a writer as being?
A few tried to change their country. One was Lu Xun. He came from the town of Shaoxing in southeast China. Today, Shaoxing is a window on China at the turn of the century. A beautiful place scarred by poverty and decay. To Lu Xun, it was a symbolic town of rivers which issued from China's past and flowed to China's future. At age 18, Lu Xun followed the rivers out of Shaoxing in search of a modern education in the big cities of Nanjing and Shanghai. Shanghai's river is the Yangtze, and it flows to the sea. Today, high as China's busiest port, linking it with the outside world. For Lu Xun, the outside world presented something totally different from China. The European gunboats that steamed upriver signaled a magical new realm of wealth and power. The row of old Western buildings that still faced the river was called the Bund. It was the heart of the Western presence in China. In 1902, the power and wealth of the foreign concessions awed and shamed Lu Xun. The West seemed to have something that China did not. Lu Xun was faced with a hard irony. To bring progress to China, he had no choice but to go abroad.
That was the first time that he was exposed to Western learning, to Western science. He became fascinated by Western ideas. But I think the West was kind of a wondrous universe. You know, it was almost like science fiction. Intellectually speaking, of course, Japan after Meiji was the place, the country. It was regarded as a window of Western learning.
In 1902, Lu Xun traveled to Tokyo. Like many other Asian scholars and writers, he was drawn to Japan because he saw in Tokyo's buildings and trains evidence that an Asian country could modernize. For Lu Xun, nothing was more modern than Western medicine. He enrolled in a medical school in the north of Japan. It was in this building at Sendai's Tohoku University where Lu Xun studied anatomy and biology. He was driven by the memory of his father who had died young, fed roots and crickets by a Chinese doctor who did not understand his father's disease.
Apparently his father had tuberculosis and he was vomiting blood. And Lu Xun, as a young kid, was summoned during the last moments to go through this ritual of calling out his father's name, you know, father and father. And finally his father sort of woke up and from his coma and said, "Shut up, and don't disturb me." And his father then sort of died peacefully. So Lu Xun said that this was the greatest trauma in his childhood. And he wanted to reenact, in medical terms, that whole episode, but this time as a Western doctor. So he will be able to cure patients like his father, who were victims of traditional Chinese medicine.
Western medicine was hard for Lu Xun. He was squeamish about blood, and the lectures in Japanese were difficult. Winter in Sendai was cold and lonely. Lu Xun was the only Chinese student in a town where Japanese troops shipped out to China to fight in the Russo-Japanese War.
After class, we would be shown news pictures of Japanese victories. There were also Chinese spies for the Russians, who were captured by the Japanese and killed while other Chinese looked on. Banzai! The students clapped their hands and cheered. But to me, the cheering was jarring.
He suddenly felt alienated in the midst of a jingoistic Japanese crowd. The crowd of Chinese people were watching one of their own being executed, but they had no expression. If you have a face with no expression, you have no soul.
The sight convinced me that medical science was not so important after all. The people of a weak and backward country, however strong and healthy their bodies might be, could only be victims or witnesses of senseless horrors. The important thing, therefore, was to change their spirit.
All right. Old documentary, I believe it's from the early or late 90s. I had to check again. It's very old, but it's the only one about Lu Xun, and I really like it. I know some people were in it, which is also really wacky. So, Lu Xun, he starts off in this kind of town on the river, but a small town, and he follows the river to get to the Yangtze River and then up to Shanghai, right? This very modern place where there's lots of Westerners, right? Lots of Western buildings. And did you catch, before we reach the irony, in what two ways did he react when he saw it? They used two words when he saw this Western modernization of Shanghai. Sorry? I just can't hear you, I'm sorry.
No pressure.
There wasn't no pressure or some pressure? Oh.
She said no pressure.
Oh, no pressure. Not quite there. There's still some pressure there in a sense. The word especially, he said he was awed. He was amazed at the advancements of Western culture and Western civilization that he saw there, but he's also ashamed. Right? This wasn't Chinese people doing this. It was mostly Western people in China doing this. So how can we Chinese people modernize? How can we yellow people modernize? Remember, that's the term that they would often use in this time period. So what's the answer? What's the irony? What does he have to do in order to modernize China? He has to go abroad. Where does he go? Japan. Because they're also yellow people, right? People who have been influenced by Confucianism. They write in Chinese. They were successfully able to modernize. We Chinese can too. Let's learn how they did it. And it's much easier for a Chinese person to go to, and cheaper for a Chinese person to go to Japan. He would have trouble understanding the Japanese lectures. He wouldn't have much trouble reading the books, though, right? Because they would be mostly written using Chinese. Very easy for Chinese people to learn to read Japanese, speaking to something else. So he starts off with a medical career. Now, it turns out to be very difficult. He's lonely there. He has trouble understanding the language, the Japanese, spoken Japanese. It's very difficult. But what event convinces him that he should not be involved in becoming a medical doctor? He has to do something else.
Pictures that they showed the rest of the Japanese war.
Yeah, he goes to a slideshow, right? This is before they have, it's not, you can't go see a movie easily. So what they do sometimes, they'd have like a slideshow of like recent pictures, and they would have someone narrating what was going on. And this is Japan. Japan is fighting the rest of the Japanese war, and they're winning all these victories. And so of course the Japanese are very, very happy. And he went to go because he was lonely and bored, I think. But then there was something that really bothered him. And it was a scene of a Chinese spy, not sure if the guy was actually a spy or not, but a Chinese spy who was being executed by the Japanese. And the Japanese are shouting, "Banzai!" You know, they're very, like, show that spy what happens if you mess with us. But remember, the rest of the Japanese war was fought in Manchuria, which Chinese people considered a part of China. And so you have Chinese people watching foreigners execute a Chinese person on Chinese soil. And what expressions did those Chinese people have? It's just blank. They were just there to watch an execution because it's kind of cool. Remember Akyu? He went to watch executions and people watched his execution. They were just like, it's kind of neat, something fun to do. So he's like, I have to wake these people up, right? What is his mission as a writer? I got to wake up China. I have to change the Chinese spirit. But I mean, literally, he has this idea of waking up. And he uses this really interesting analogy. He says the Chinese people are asleep in a metal box. So the Chinese people are asleep in this box made of metal. And they're going to suffocate if they don't get out. So I'm going to bang. I'm going to bang on the wall of the box in hopes that they wake up. Maybe they can escape then. Maybe they can get out of the box and they'll live. Maybe they can't get out. But at least they'll understand their problem. Right? I need to wake up the Chinese nation. And he does this through his satire, right? Through books like Akyu, right? It was such a satirical work, right? Totally just really, I mean, no one's good there, right? That's how he's going to wake up Chinese. He wants to show up a mirror. He says, oh, we Chinese, we think we're so proud. We're like Akyu. Remember, Akyu's always making excuses for his defeats instead of facing reality. So I'm going to hold up a mirror to us Chinese. We'll see who we Chinese really are. Not because I'm hopeless, but because I'm hopeful. Right? He's a profoundly hopeful person. I want to wake up China so we can deal with this terrible situation. And we do have time. I want us to see then, I want to play another clip. I had you read Akyu. There's another one that some of you have read because you took my class over the summer, but Diary of a Madman. Right? How does he view traditional Chinese culture as seen in the Diary of a Madman? Right? This is another one of his great works, I think.
For Lu Xun, ancient culture was China's greatest enemy. He thought the memory of ancient glory blinded people to the horrors of Chinese civilization. He wrote a story called Diary of a Madman about a lonely hero who noticed something very strange in a popular Chinese history book. On every page is written humanity, justice, morality, and virtue. But between the lines, the hero sees a secret message appear with the true meaning of China's history. People eating people.
What can be worse than to construct an allegory of a history of cannibalism? The Chinese people eat themselves, they eat each other. It is a culture of people eating people. So this is probably the most harrowing kind of allegory solution. And that's the Diary of a Madman.
Lu Xun saw the madman as a metaphor for the revolutionary writer. Someone who saw Chinese society in a way that most people could not. But Lu Xun was still pessimistic. At the end of his story, the visionary madman is cured. He becomes like everyone else, no longer able to see the horrors around him. As a college teacher in Beijing, Lu Xun was teaching a new generation a radical message. In a country consumed by its own insanity, the only clear vision belonged to the eyes of the madman.
All right. So how does he see traditional Chinese culture in the madman? Right, this idea of cannibalism, right? He says he reads a story. Right? He reads Chinese history and how great China is. It's all about morality. It's all about virtue. All about Confucianism, how we should follow virtue. But then he starts reading between the lines, and he sees other Chinese characters, and they talk about cannibalism. And the whole story is this madman who becomes convinced that his neighbors are trying to eat him, and that all of Chinese history is people eating people. And so what this is it's a metaphor for saying we Chinese are so cruel to each other. We claim to believe in virtue, but look at how we treat each other. We exploit each other. We hurt each other. And we're divided from each other. And that division allows people to come in and beat us up even more. We have to overcome this. And that means looking at our true situation. Only once we understand the truth about us, that we have this culture of exploitation, only then can we change that culture. And only then can we save China. Right? That's his primary goal. And that's a perfect example of what the May 4th movement is trying to do. Destroy the old culture so we can build a new one. Very different from, say, the New Life movement, right, which tried to use Confucianism to modernize China. So there's still a lot of disagreement. How do we save China? Is Confucianism good or bad? That's something that's, in a sense, still being argued. We'll pick up again on Wednesday. I don't know what room we'll be on. Please go to the old room first, because they will probably have it fixed by then. Yanhui, I hope the class was okay. Well, thank you for joining us today. And you're welcome to come again if you're interested. It would be nice to have, if you have a different opinion from Tianyu, it could be interesting. But yeah, today was a difficult day, I think. Not an easy section. But sometimes if you have an opinion, you think differently, please let me know. It would be good to hear, especially if we can work something out. The American students, especially, and Daye may be interested in hearing your perspective as well. Thanks, you too. Take care.
Well, I don't know what else to do.
Testing. Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Nobody.
Hi, Mrs. Ray. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Oh, no, that's okay. Thanks for arranging that. Yeah, Abby tracked me down, and so I knew where to go. So we started a couple minutes late, but that wasn't bad. That let the people who were late find their way. So it worked out well. But thank you very much for taking care of that.
I love that comment.
How y'all doing?
Doing well.
Oh, doing all right, doing all right. Y'all have a good one.
Now, if you have not run an item analysis, you simply click Run right here, and that will go ahead and get the analysis available for you. I've already ran that one this morning so that I can look at it. So I'm just going to hop back into the item analysis. It's as simple as clicking Run, waiting a few seconds, and then your analysis will be available to you. Right, so this is the item analysis screen. We're going to discuss what these features are. So as you can see right here, where my mouse pointer is, this is the test summary. It tells you everything from possible points, possible questions, how many attempts have been completed, the average score of the exam, and the average time that participants spent inside this exam. You also get individual question summaries down here, and we'll get into this a little bit later. This next box here is your discrimination score. Your discrimination score is very important. So if it says it's a good question or a fair question, that means the student who got the answer right did typically well on the exam overall. So that is what it is looking at there. Now, if we look at the difficulty rating, the difficulty percentage is based upon how many answered the question correct. So, if you're looking at an exam and 10 out of the 20 people got it incorrect, it would probably be considered, difficult 30 to 80%. And then if it's less than 30%, then it is considered a hard question. And these are questions that you can look at and see if maybe you worded them improperly, if you may have selected the wrong answer when you were keying it all in. So this gives you a lot of information about. Right, so now let's hop down into the filter questions portion. Right, I'm going to go to the bottom here so you can see the key. So this is going to show every question of the exam. And let's talk about the legend here. If it has this dot here, it's recommending that you review this question. If you have this here, then it can tell that you have changed that question after you deployed it. You deployed the exam, then you went to edit the test, and you changed it. And the star right here, the asterisk, tells you that not all the submissions have been graded yet, and therefore could be influencing some of these schools. So let's talk about the questions here, the question type. It shows the question itself. It shows the question type. It shows your discrimination score. It shows the difficulty of the question. How many graded attempts on that question, the average score, and the standard deviation. So this gives you information that you can look at and determine whether you may have worded this improperly. It may have been that the question was too difficult. It could even show you that you need something in. The beauty of this feature is that you can hop right into the question, so we can dive a little bit deeper. It's going to tell us just about this specific question now. We kind of have that same information and stuff that we're using for the entire exam. And now we see it just on this question. So we need to look at discrimination. We need to look at how difficult this was. And acknowledge difficulty was easy on this one. That means 99.86% of people got this question correct. We need to look at how many people it is referring to. The average score is the one. You get the standard deviation scores as well, and it shows you how many students completely get that question. So you can see your entire question here, and then there's a true false, and it does, and it is going to do a multiple choice as well, but it shows you how many people got it correct, how many people got it incorrect. True is the correct answer, which is indicated by this check mark here, and you see 1,083 students got it correct, 1 got it incorrect. It shows you, based upon their score on the entire exam, how many people fall in each category. So your top 25% of scores on the exam, 846 got that correct. So you can look at the entire exam as a whole, or you can look at these individual questions. I'm going to go to a multiple choice because it looks a little bit different. So hop in here. It's exactly the same, but as you can see, it's got a bigger breakdown. And again, you can see out of your top 25% of scores, 847 got that correct. 133 got it correct, then we're in that second 25% of grade. And then as it breaks down, you can see how it all deviated out. One of the great things about this, let's hop back into this. If we're in this question, and we realize, oh man, we messed up. This was supposed to be false. Not marked it as true. You can edit the test simply by clicking here. It's going to hop into that test, and you can change right here within the item analysis, which is really, really nice. The other great thing about that is, if you do change something within the edit test or within the edit test when you're into a question, it will automatically update the grade on every single one of those attempts. So if you had incorrectly keyed in B as the correct answer, and C was in fact the correct answer after you get into this item analysis, you realize you had a mistake, and it will automatically regrade and update the grade book accordingly. That is pretty much it on item analysis. You can filter. You want to look at just multiple choice. If you want to change your discrimination to only on 4 questions, whereby I'm going to look at my hard questions and any combination of those things, you can hit go, and then it'll hop you into those. There were no hard questions on this exam, so it didn't pull anything. You can hit questions, go, and it's going to show us which ones were considered easy questions. So this is just a snapshot for you to look at your exam after it's been administered. This isn't necessarily a tool that you're probably going to make heavy use of, but it is a faculty tool that's supposed to make your life easier. It lets you get an overall snapshot of your exam. It lets you see how your good students are performing on your exam. Gives you the opportunity to look at questions that may have been poor, and it also gives you the opportunity to edit and update the scores of those exams right here within the tool. So again, item analysis, really easy to get to. You just go to your full grade center. You find your column where you've administered the exam. You hit your drop-down arrow. You click item analysis. You click run, and it will indicate it here that it is available. You simply click, and that's how you get into all the information related to your exam. Like I said, this was going to be about a 10-minute training. If you want more information, my advice is to go in on an exam that you have already administered, look at this, kind of click around. It's going to give you insight into how you're building exams and how your students are performing on those exams. If you have any questions, I am always available. You can email me directly, or you can call me or swing by IT one day. I'm more than glad to speak with you in any format that works best for you. Again, thanks for attending this training, and I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording and then see if we have any questions. Right, Frank and Barbara, do you have any questions? All right, we answered all the questions. Yeah, I saw that, Frank, so I went back and showed you exactly how to get to it right there at the end. If you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to me anytime. And I have you and Barbara both down as attending this training, which will cover you for your COIL recertification for the next year. So if you need anything, yay, right? So if you need
Pete, can you hear me?
Yes, Barbara, I can.
Okay, I could get the visuals on the screen, but I had to finally find it on my phone to get the audio. Is that how it's supposed to work?
No, it should work. You may have, when you entered the collaborating session, you may have clicked something, or it just was having an issue this time. Frank said he had done it.
Okay, I will let Floyd know that. I've been using this item analysis feature for, 5-8 years, and saving the better questions in the test bank, so it was good, though. You know, this gets a review, but I am familiar with it.
Yeah, it is good, and if you are COIL certified, then it'll